What happens when a letter is opened live on stage and everyone in the studio freezes, including Dr. Phil himself, who says the words no one expected. Stop the cameras. The white envelope in his hand wasn't just paper. It was a bomb that would detonate 20 years of carefully constructed lies. Dr. Phil stood center stage, the envelope trembling slightly in his grip. His face, normally composed, controlled, professional, showed something the audience had rarely seen: genuine shock. Behind him, Janet sat frozen in the guest chair, her face drained of all color. To his right, Michael stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing but producing no sound. The studio, typically buzzing with energy, had gone completely silent. Even the cameras stopped moving. "Hold on," Dr. Phil said, his voice low and commanding. "Stop the tape. Right now." But to understand how a single letter could stop a live taping of the most watched daytime talk show in America, we need to go back 3 hours, to when the Parker family walked into Studio 29 believing their secret was still safe. Janet Parker had called the Dr. Phil show 6 weeks earlier. Her voice on the phone screening had been steady, rehearsed even. "My husband and I need help with our teenage daughter," she'd said. "She's acting out, skipping school, saying terrible things about our family. We just want her to understand how good she has it." The producers had heard this story 1,000 times. Troubled teen. Concerned parents. Standard episode material. But Chelsea Parker, the 16-year-old at the center of it all, had told the pre-interview producers something very different. "They're lying about everything. And I can prove it." When the producer asked what she meant, Chelsea had simply said, "There's a letter. My grandmother gave it to me before she died. They don't know I have it." That letter was now in Dr. Phil's hand, and what it contained would change everything. The taping had started normally enough. Janet and Michael Parker sat on stage, looking every bit the concerned suburban parents. Janet wore a conservative blue dress, her hair perfectly styled. Michael sat with his hands folded, projecting calm authority. Dr. Phil began with his standard opening. "So tell me, what brings you here today?" Janet launched into her prepared speech. "Dr. Phil, we're at our wits' end. Chelsea has become completely unmanageable. She accuses us of terrible things, she tells lies to her teachers, she's destroying our family's reputation in our community." Michael nodded along. "We've given her everything. A beautiful home, the best schools, every opportunity. And this is how she repays us." Chelsea sat in the guest chair opposite them, arms crossed, jaw set. She said nothing, but her eyes were locked on her parents with an intensity that made several audience members shift uncomfortably. Dr. Phil paused. Something wasn't adding up. "Chelsea," he said, turning to face her directly. "You've been quiet. You're hearing your parents say these things about you. What's your response?" Chelsea's voice was steady, almost eerily calm. "They're lying. About everything." Janet gasped dramatically. "See? This is exactly what we're talking about. She can't accept any responsibility." "I'm not finished," Chelsea cut her off. The sharpness in her tone made even Dr. Phil raise an eyebrow. "Go on," he said. "My name isn't Chelsea Parker. It's Chelsea Morrison. And these people aren't my parents." The studio erupted in murmurs. Janet's perfectly composed face cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "Dr. Phil, this is what we've been dealing with. These delusional fantasies." "I have proof," Chelsea said. She reached into her jacket pocket. Dr. Phil held up his hand. "Wait. Before we go any further, I need to understand what you're saying. You're claiming these people who raised you aren't your biological parents?" "That's not what I'm claiming," Chelsea said. "I'm saying they took me, when I was 3 years old, from a grocery store parking lot in Phoenix." The silence that followed was absolute. Michael stood up. "This is insane. Dr. Phil, we have birth certificates, medical records, school documents." "Sit down, Michael," Dr. Phil said. His voice had changed. The folksy therapist was gone. This was the forensic psychologist who had worked with law enforcement for decades. Chelsea pulled a yellowed envelope from her pocket. My grandmother, their mother, gave me this 2 months before she died. She said I'd know when the time was right to open it. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil walked over and took the envelope from Chelsea's hands. He examined it carefully. The paper was old, the handwriting shaky but legible. It was addressed simply, to Chelsea. The truth. When did you open this? Dr. Phil asked. 3 weeks ago, Chelsea said. That's when I called your show. Dr. Phil looked at Janet and Michael. Both were sitting rigid, their faces masks of barely controlled panic. Before I open this, Dr. Phil said, I'm going to give you both a chance to tell me what's really going on here. The cameras captured every micro-expression. Janet's eye twitched. Michael's hands clenched into fists. There's nothing to tell, Janet said, but her voice cracked. That letter is probably just the confused ramblings of an old woman with dementia. Mom had perfect clarity until the day she died, Dr. Phil said quietly. And you know it. The use of mom hit like a hammer. This wasn't about a patient anymore. This was personal. Dr. Phil carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in the same shaky handwriting. He read it silently, his expression growing darker with each line. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. The audience would later describe it as the moment they saw Dr. Phil truly angry. I need to stop this taping, he said. Right now. The producers in the booth scrambled. Live tapings don't stop. The audience wasn't supposed to see this kind of break in the fourth wall. But Dr. Phil was already moving. He walked directly to Janet and Michael. You have one chance, he said, his voice low enough that only they could hear, except the microphones caught every word. One chance to tell me the truth before I read this letter on camera and call the authorities. Janet broke first. Her carefully constructed facade shattered like glass. She was alone, Janet whispered. In the parking lot. Just a baby, crying in a shopping cart. Her mother had left her there while she went back inside the store. We had just gotten news that we couldn't have children. We were devastated. And there she was, this beautiful little girl, abandoned and alone. So you took her, Dr. Phil said. It wasn't a question. Michael's head dropped into his hands. It was supposed to be temporary. Just until the police found her mother. But then we saw the news reports. The mother was a drug addict. In and out of jail. We convinced ourselves we were saving her. The studio had gone from silent to suffocating. Your mother knew, Dr. Phil said, still holding the letter. Janet nodded, tears now streaming down her face. She was with us that day. She begged us to turn around, to bring Chelsea back. But we didn't listen. And she kept our secret for 16 years because she loved us. But before she died, she said she couldn't take it to her grave. Chelsea sat completely still, processing everything. Her voice when she spoke was small. My real mother is still alive. Dr. Phil looked at the letter again. According to your grandmother, yes. Her name is Sarah Morrison. And she's been looking for you for 16 years. What happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil did something he had never done in 30 years of television. He walked off stage, still holding the letter, and directly to his production office. The cameras followed. Get me the FBI, he said to his executive producer. Now. And find Sarah Morrison. The legal implications were staggering. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was kidnapping. Child abduction. Federal crimes. Back on stage, Janet and Michael sat in stunned silence, the full weight of their actions finally crashing down. Security personnel had quietly positioned themselves at the exits. Chelsea looked at the audience, her young face showing a maturity that shouldn't belong to a teenager. I always knew something was wrong. The way they looked at me sometimes. The way they'd panic when I asked questions about when I was little. The way they never let me take one of those DNA tests everyone else was doing. An audience member, a mother herself, stood up. Honey, you were so brave to find the truth. Others stood with her. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, not applauding, but standing in solidarity with a girl who had lived 13 years of her life as a lie. Dr. Phil returned to the stage. His face was set in determination. Janet and Michael Parker, he said formally. I've just spoken with the FBI. They're on their way. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you get legal representation immediately. He turned to Chelsea. As for you, young lady, you're not going anywhere with them. Child Protective Services is already on their way, and we're going to make sure you're safe while this sorts out. Then he did something that broke every television protocol. He sat down next to Chelsea, put his hand on her shoulder, and spoke directly to her, ignoring the cameras entirely. I know this is overwhelming. I know you're scared. But you did the right thing. Your grandmother gave you the truth because she knew you were strong enough to handle it. And you are. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. During the commercial break that was supposed to happen next, Dr. Phil made a call. Within 2 hours, his team had located Sarah Morrison, still living in Phoenix, still looking for her daughter, still posting on missing children websites every single week for 16 years. The show's format was abandoned entirely. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a rescue mission. By the time the taping resumed, now being recorded for a special episode, Dr. Phil had Sarah Morrison on video call. When Chelsea saw her biological mother's face for the first time in 13 years, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the screen and whispered, "You have my eyes." Sarah Morrison was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. I never stopped looking. Never. Not for one single day. The reunion happened 2 days later, off camera, in a private room with therapists present. But what Dr. Phil did next became the defining moment of his career. He didn't just connect a daughter with her mother. He used every resource at his disposal, his legal team, his connections, his platform, to ensure that Chelsea had support through the trauma of discovering her entire life had been a lie. He arranged for intensive therapy, not just for Chelsea and Sarah, but for helping them rebuild a relationship that had been stolen from them. He connected them with support groups for families of kidnapped children. He made sure Sarah had the resources to fight for custody. And he did something else. He made sure the story was told, not for ratings, but to remind every parent watching that children aren't possessions. They're human beings with rights, with identities, with histories that belong to them. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The Parker case, as it became known, led to Janet and Michael being arrested and charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and fraud. They both ultimately pleaded guilty and received prison sentences. Sarah Morrison got her daughter back, though both acknowledged that the healing process would take years. Chelsea chose to keep the name she'd grown up with, but added Morrison, Chelsea Morrison Parker, honoring both the girl she was and the woman she was becoming. Dr. Phil followed up with them multiple times over the following year. In one particularly moving episode, Chelsea talked about the letter, her grandmother's final act of love. She knew it would destroy everything, Chelsea said. But she also knew I deserved the truth. Even if it hurt. Even if it cost her sons their freedom. She chose me. She chose the truth. Dr. Phil kept that original letter. Not for the show, not for publicity, but because he understood what it represented, the power of truth, even when buried for years, to eventually surface. In his final commentary on the case, Dr. Phil addressed the camera directly, something he rarely did with such personal intensity. In 30 years of doing this show, I've seen thousands of families in crisis. But this case reminded me why I do this work. Not for the ratings. Not for the drama. But because sometimes, in the middle of all this chaos we call television, we get a chance to actually save someone. Chelsea Morrison Parker deserved her truth. And her grandmother, even from beyond the grave, made sure she got it. The letter remained a symbol, not just of a secret exposed, but of a love strong enough to tell the truth even when it cost everything. The Dr. Phil show donated $100,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Chelsea's name. Sarah Morrison became an advocate for families of missing children. And Chelsea, despite everything, graduated high school with honors and went on to study social work, wanting to help other kids who felt like something in their lives wasn't quite right. The white envelope that started it all. Dr. Phil had it framed and hung in his office, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments in television aren't scripted. They're real. They're raw. And they change lives. Because that's what Dr. Phil understood better than anyone. His platform wasn't just about entertainment. It was about intervention. About using the bright lights and cameras to do something that mattered. And on that day, holding that letter, stopping those cameras, breaking every protocol, he did exactly that. The legacy wasn't just in the reunion. It was in the message, that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth pursuing. That families built on lies will eventually crumble. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love is telling someone the truth they need to hear, even if it destroys everything else. Chelsea Morrison Parker's grandmother understood that. Dr. Phil honored it. And the world watched as one girl's courage to open a letter changed not just her life, but reminded everyone that the truth, eventually, always finds its way to light.